Well, Netflix's live-action adaptation of One Piece has come out, so naturally all the little weebs are slithering out of their den to discuss it. And I'm no different. Hey there, my name is Carrie the Snail, and this is my cosplay of Luffy, you know? What, you don't remember Shanks having this hat? You don't remember Luffy having a mustache? You didn't read the manga, did ya? And that's why we're here today. As a longtime fan of One Piece, I just have to talk about the live-action series. What it did right, what it didn't get right, and ultimately how it compares to the manga. Now, I'm pretty die-hard when it comes to reading the One Piece manga. I've collected these bad boys ever since I started reading the manga when I was like 14. And yes, I collected them individually, okay? I didn't buy the 3-in-1 volumes, okay? They didn't have that back then. This series absolutely gripped me by the nads, and I have never been able to stop reading it since. And I'm a grown-ass man now. One Piece is one of the nearest and dearest stories to me. Similarly to Harry Potter, this saga is so long that I grew up with these characters as they grew up as well. And that was one of the most special things to be a part of, because now that I'm older and I'm stronger, kind of, the Straw Hats are now vastly different and more evolved from where they started. This is a story so long and gigantic that it really makes you feel like you're a part of something huge. That being said, coming from somebody who has read and collected over $1,000 worth of all this manga, I hope you take my word for it when I say that this live action show is actually pretty dang good. Despite all the odds, despite everything stacked against it, this live action series, I think it does a pretty good job at portraying these characters, this story, and the world. Just because the show is not a complete atrocity, it puts it leagues against most live action anime adaptations, especially the Netflix ones. Now, I want to make something clear to you. I'm not going to be comparing the live action show to the anime. I do not watch the anime. I've seen maybe like a handful of episodes in my life, and it just really wasn't my thing. Just the sheer amount of filler never made me want to watch it, and also, the dub is annoying as hell. I think I love and appreciate the characters more as they exist in my mind. I'm gonna leave it that way. That's just my preference though. I'm sure the anime is really good, and I know I'm probably missing out on a lot of awesome moments too. So in this video, we are strictly talking about the live action show as it relates to the manga. Now, before I watched the live action series, I had to make peace with myself that there's of course going to be parts of the plot that have been remixed or cut entirely, or just rearranged so that it flows better with a live action setting. So because of that, I reread volumes 1 to 11 so I can see where they move things around. I wanted to see how it directly compared, so as not to scrutinize the live action show, but just kind of see what they do with the source material. And for the most part, I think they did a pretty good job. But in this video, I wanted to walk through it with you so you can see for yourself how it deviates and expands upon the manga. What sort of things they added, what sort of things they left behind, so you can see it for yourself. There are 3 major things that I was looking out for in the live action, and they are how it portrays the original intent of the story, the characters, and the world. So with that being said, let's crack open one of these bad boys, huh? The first episode covers Volume 1, surprise, surprise. And it does it mostly to a T. Instead of getting Luffy's full backstory mainly in the beginning, we actually get it sprinkled intermittently throughout the first 2 episodes. Luffy meets up with Kobe and then beats up Alvida. In fact, actually, the actor for Kobe does a really great job at being that like stuttery, you know, shaking in my boots kind of guy. They have some great interactions together, and Luffy portrays how not all pirates have to be bad. And this gives Kobe courage that there's something a lot better out there for him, that he could be something better. Then we're introduced to Zoro, which actually is the first scene that does not show up in the manga at all. Zoro is standing in front of what I believe is Rika's shrine that we see later on in his backstory. And then Mr. Seven, a la Baroque Works, walks in and tries to recruit Zoro. Now this is very interesting because first of all, I was really surprised that they introduced Baroque Works so early on. Whether it's an Easter egg or if they really plan on getting to it in the future, yeah, it was kind of cool to see that weaved in here and weaved into Zoro's introduction as well. Naturally, Zoro turns down the invitation. He's his own man. He's got his own thing going on. And then I love how he gives the quip, "Do I get a tattoo like that? My favorite number is 1. So good. A beautiful way to introduce Zoro. Not long after that, we get Nami's introduction, which actually doesn't happen until like at the end of this volume, right before when we get into the Buggy arc, and her introduction also very closely follows the manga. We get Nami and Zoro introduced earlier so that Luffy and Kobe can run into them at this bar near the Marine base. Helmeppo then rolls in and Zoro outright disrespects him, causing this whole bar fight to happen between Zoro and the Marines. This is the first like real fight sequence, and it was really well choreographed. Zoro does these really cool moves where he's striking these Marines with just the butt of his sword, pulling it out of his sheath. Something about it's kind of got this Jackie Chan like improvised kind of vibe to it, but it clearly shows that these guys are no match for Zoro. He doesn't even need to pull his sword out. Helmeppo is pissed, so he arrests Zoro, while Luffy, standing nearby, sees this whole thing going down and decides, I gotta invite this guy on my crew. So Luffy breaks into the Marine base to free Zoro and get his swords back, and this is also where he runs into Nami, who's trying to steal a map to the Grand Line. We get some great interactions with them early on, juxtaposing how Nami is sly and calculated, while Luffy is a naive goofball. Before the major Axe Hand Morgan fight, though, we see that Helmeppo has Zoro's swords. And I don't know if this was something you expected to get when you were watching a live-action adaptation of One Piece, but we get some Helmeppo ass. Some Helmeppo cheeks. That's right. Who would have ever thought that you would have seen this guy's ass cheeks? I was really surprised up in the little title card that shows, oh, there's smoking, there's violence. To see that there was nudity involved? This is the nudity. The only nudity in this entire season. This guy right here. What a treat. I was absolutely floored with how out of pocket this was. Thank you, show. I didn't know I needed Helmeppo ass until you gave me a big, heaping spoonful of it. And I'm grateful. The Marine base fight with Axe Hand Morgan was really great. I thought the actor that played him had a great performance. And I'll take a moment to state this right here so I don't have to say it throughout. More often than not, the casting for the show is absolutely phenomenal. On average, everybody does a wonderful job. And they're all casted so well as to really give the vibe of the character. Sure, some don't always hit. There's probably a few that aren't my fave. But on average, the casting and the acting are both very strong. The look of the characters, the costume design do so well in portraying these often really zany characters. I'll go over this more later, but some standouts for me in particular were Luffy, Kobe, Buggy, Zeph, Sanji, and Arlong. The episode ends with the newly joined Zoro as a part of Luffy's crew, and Nami, who's just tagging along for the time being. One last detail in this ending scene, I love how when Zoro gets his swords back from Helmeppo, he gives him the classic stupid haircut that he has in the manga. It was just a wonderful little Easter egg. So in all, I was really impressed by this first episode. Again, it didn't blow my mind or anything like that, but time and time again, I was really astounded with how they made subtle twists to the plot, but still kept the integrity of the characters and story. What they managed to pull off after a track record of such terrible live-action adaptations was really impressive. I was a little skeptical with Inyaki's performance as Luffy. Sometimes his delivery in the first and second episodes feel a little flat, or he has these pauses that make me feel like he's performing on a stage rather than the screen, but his performance is something that grew on me more and more, which I'll get into later. Overall, it's a great first installment. Okay, episode 2, moving it right along. This episode covers volume 2 and some of 3. First things first, say it with me, everybody. Buggy the freaking clown. Yes! I am a major simp for Buggy here. Jeff Ward as Buggy is absolutely incredible. He's got this perfectly psychotic and really self-centered energy. The way he delivers his lines is so perfectly snarky. He is so good. Again, I haven't watched the anime, but his performance as Buggy really gave me a new love and appreciation for this character. As far as the plot goes, this episode jumps between Luffy and the gang and the clutches of Buggy and the rest of Luffy's backstory. And there begins this overarching B-plot with Kobe, Helmeppo, and now Garp, which continues throughout the rest of the series. This is cool because it's something glazed over in the manga, but actually expanded upon here. Oftentimes, Oda does this thing where in between chapters, he'll often have a panel that shows what some of the characters are up to after the Straw Hats encounter them. And this might go on for several chapters. It's a fun way of kind of giving you a glimpse of what's going on in the background. Sometimes this actually does amount to some major plot points later down the story. This B-plot was one of those side stories, so it's cool to see it expanded upon here. The mayor of the town that Buggy took over, Boodle, and the rest of the village takes more of a backseat so we can focus in more on the main characters. However, he does get a subtle cameo here, so that's cool at least. And that's something that's also consistent throughout the show. If they remove something pretty big, they're usually good about at least giving you an Easter egg hinting at it. They might have that character present, but they might not play as big of a role as they did in the manga. The manga, of course, focuses more on the town and how devastating it was for Buggy and his crew to take over and totally destroy their town. And I get that we have to cut it in the show, but it's kind of sad sometimes because a lot of this builds up to that emotional payoff when Luffy defeats the villain and so on. This is pretty consistent throughout this live action series where they cut out a lot of the side characters in order to focus more on the main characters, so we see less of the supporting characters that really build up that emotional payoff in the arc. Something else that I liked that was unique to this show was that we get more interactions between Zoro and Nami as they're both captured and caged next to each other. It's really cool to especially see them build a rapport with each other, especially with what we know about Nami later on. The fight with Buggy was mostly accurate. We don't have a fight between Zoro and Kamaji, and we don't even see Moji. A couple details about the fight that kind of bummed me out though is that in the manga, Zoro was actually the first to attack Buggy. That he comes in with this devastating blow that slashes Buggy to pieces, falls on the floor like a bunch of Legos, and this is what showed what was really amazing about Buggy's powers is that Zoro is effectively useless against him. The show just goes straight to Buggy, popping off his, arms and leg pieces and whatever, and then firing him off at the crew. I feel like this was such a big missed opportunity because it gives you so much more of that awe factor. You're like, whoa, what's going on? Didn't Zoro just kill this dude? Buggy's chop fruit makes the most sense when he's chopped. So I was bummed that Zoro didn't really get to introduce that key factor. Another thing that I'm bummed that they missed out on was Luffy just, kicking Buggy in the nads. That was just funny, and I feel like it could have worked here. The episode ends with Luffy's backstory being finished off. And by the way, the big old sea beast looks amazing. Overall, this episode was also pretty good. Buggy was an absolute joy to watch. Love that guy. We get more great character moments between Nami and Zoro. And we also get to see how crazy some of these battles can get. How crazy some of the powers are. Episode 3 covers the rest of Volume 3 and a little bit of 4. The Syrup Village arc is definitely among one of my least favorite arcs in the whole entire series. While Usopp's story is really touching and cute, the Black Cat Pirates really don't do much for me. And it's not so much that it's a bad arc, it's just really not great compared to a lot of what's to come. So please, if you're not enjoying this particular part as well, do not stop here. Continue past this. I'm not familiar with what a lot of the One Piece community says, but I think oftentimes they usually say get through this whole season's worth of volumes before you really can make a decision. Also, this episode cuts out entirely this very, very little tiny arc that's like a chapter or 2 long, where Luffy and Nami stop by this little island with these like weird animals and this dude? Yeah, there was no need to add this. It's not super interesting. I'm not really sure why this little breather section is here. Really, the only thing of importance that we get from it is it's actually the first time that Nami describes how the world is structured. You got the red line, and then you got the grand line. This episode opens up in a great way, establishing how Usopp is a liar and lies about the pirates coming. And when the crew make it to Syrup Village, Usopp is pretending to be a worker on this shipyard. He's working on the merry-go, which is what it's called in the manga at least. And Luffy is immediately drawn to it. He's like, I gotta have this ship. Who do I ask for it? Great way to not only set up how Usopp is a liar, but also the merry-go. I also got to take a moment to mention how incredible the set designs are in this entire show. I cannot even fathom how much budget went into just the set design and the costume design. The fact that they made this whole shipyard and this ship is insanely impressive. Multiple ships even. In the day and age of MCU movies that are 99% CGI, it is really refreshing to actually see a show commit to practical effects. Even if it doesn't always pan out or some things might look a little goofy, I have such respect for the designers of this show to commit to practical effects for all the weird and bizarre looking things in this world. All that to say, this episode is actually one of my least favorite, but I cannot deny how many times my jaw just dropped at the sheer attention and detail to literally every scene and shot in this show. This was the first episode where I really felt that. The shipyard, the garden in front of the mansion, Kaya's room, the dining room, the wardrobe room, the kitchen. I particularly liked this kitchen. So many of these sets are filled to the brim and absolutely bursting with visual detail. It's really impressive. Some of the biggest changes in this episode are the cutting of supporting characters and how mansion-focused this plot becomes. When we first see Usopp, he's kind of like an older brother character to these kids in this village. Carrot, pepper, and onion. They all treat him as like the captain of their little club. It's really cute, but ultimately, I'm fine with them cutting it. The story is more focused on them being stuck in the mansion. Because the crew befriend Usopp, Kaya invites them over for dinner. And this is where we see Klahadore and the Meow Band brothers like doing sneaky stuff in the background. I feel like the plot slows down considerably here, but on the other hand, it does give some more time for more character interaction. I love this scene where the Straw Hats go to change their attire, and they all have these moments that perfectly bring out their personalities. Nami walks up to Luffy, he's like, how do I look? And Luffy's like, you look like Nami. And Nami's like, Zoro, what are you gonna wear? And he's like, something black. It's a great time, and you get more of these moments sprinkled throughout this episode. Also in the background, I was really surprised that Arlong was introduced and shows up to Buggy and starts harassing him about where the Grand Line map is. I think it worked as a way of setting up the Arlong Park arc while still utilizing characters that we know and also love. Again, it's one of my least favorite arcs in this part of the East Blue, so I think it can feel particularly slow. I usually read through this part real quick. There are definitely some nice character moments here though, especially when Luffy and Zoro are getting to know Usopp in the kitchen and they're having a chat. And then also Nami has some like girl talk moment with Kaya, which I really wasn't expecting. This episode definitely gave the characters a little bit more time to breathe and interact with each other, so it was nice. Episode 4 finishes off Volume 4 and then covers most of 5. This episode starts with Zoro climbing out of the well that Butchie and Shyam dumped him in. It seemed like kind of a quick way to get Zoro out of the picture, especially because they knock him out by just smashing a bottle on his head. What? So while Zoro is trying to climb out of this well a la Batman from The Dark Knight Rises, we then get his backstory. They splice it in and out of him struggling to get out of this well as a means of reinforcing and showing to you what motivates this man. And I think it was pretty well done. Once Zoro makes it back in the mansion though, he's met with Butchie and Shyam and fights them both. And oh my gosh. This fight scene had absolutely no business going this hard. The Syrup Village arc is among one of my least favorite arcs in the whole entire series. Shyam and Butchie are likewise one of my least favorite antagonists. They're just a couple of cringe lords. But I did not expect that this fight scene was gonna be this freaking good. Shyam and Butchie are like tag teaming it. Butchie will jump in front of Shyam and then slash at Zoro, and then they tag team out and the other one goes, and Zoro's like fending both of them off. He's on the stairs, they will jump up towards him and he knocks him back down. It is so fast paced. There's this really cool move where like Zoro runs around this big centerpiece and he's all like it was super good, super well choreographed. I definitely had to rewind a couple times just to watch some of those bits again. It was awesome. It's not like this is the best fight scene in the world or anything, but it's super fast paced, it's choreographed super well, it's super visceral, and I had low expectations about this fight. It was just so good. I was super surprised to see this live action portray this fight even better than how it did in the manga. I can't believe you did it live action, but you pulled this one off, and I will hands down take this fight over the manga any day. While this was a super huge win for this episode and show, this episode is also where I think it has its first major misstep in terms of how its character arcs go. Klahadore tears through the mansion looking for Kaya, while her, Nami, and Usopp keep evading him. Eventually, Luffy comes in and beats him up, bada bing. And then at the end of the episode, Luffy invites Usopp on his crew. Why? In this episode, Usopp doesn't really do anything. In the manga, Usopp continually stands up to these baddies. Despite his cowardice, he chooses to face them in order to protect Kaya. Usopp is there on the battlefield in order to protect his friends, even when he's getting the long-nosed snot beat out of him. This is the bravery that Luffy sees in Usopp and why he invites him on his crew. While rereading these volumes, something that I noticed that I love a lot is the way characters will notice when someone else demonstrates true heart and willpower. It's when Luffy sees that Zoro eats the sugary rice balls that the young girl makes for him. It's when Zeph sees how fiercely Luffy fights against Don Krieg despite the overwhelming odds. It's when Mihawk sees that Zoro will not step away even though he's got a blade plunged in his chest, because an honorable swordsman would never back away from a fight. These are the moments that I love in One Piece, especially in these early volumes. And unfortunately, this does not come across at all for Usopp here. And the frustrating thing is I think they easily could have pulled this off though. All they needed to do was cut back on how long Klahadore was just tearing through the mansion, playing cat and mouse, looking for Kaya. Klahadore backs him into a corner, and then Usopp would be forced to stand up against Klahadore. Usopp demonstrates his sharpshooting abilities and maybe some of his gadgets, but might not ultimately work against Klahadore. Klahadore beats the long-nosed snot out of him, and then when Luffy shows up, he sees what Usopp did in order to protect Kaya. How determined he was, and how he had to stop running away and face this villain. That is what earns Usopp's spot in Luffy's crew. And it would have showcased his sharpshooting abilities, because he literally fires his slingshot once. I think if they went for an approach like this, it would have made Usopp joining the crew way more earned. Also, Usopp and Kaya kiss at the end. All right. I'm glad we're finally done with these episodes and this part of the arc. It's not my fave, but ultimately, I think it's pulled off fine here. The worst of it being the way Usopp was handled at the end, and its best is that freaking Shyam and Butchie fight. Much like the manga, for me at least, this is the point at which the show really starts to take off. And there is a lot of great things to cover in those last few episodes, so please join me for that in the future. Well, out of all the One Piece geeks that are setting sail right into your YouTube and maybe even TikTok feeds, I really appreciate that you stopped and chose to watch this video. Thank you so much for considering to watch me foam at the mouth about One Piece as well. It's such a special series that I hold dearly to my heart, and it's really cool to see this live action do it some justice. I do plan on covering the last 4 episodes sometime soon, so if you liked what you saw here, please consider subscribing. I also have a little series I'm doing called Internet Garbage, where I mainly observe ridiculous TikToks and make fun of them, but you know, don't we all? Thanks again for watching. I'm Carrie the Snail, and I'll see you the next time I'm out of my shell. Peace.